In question 94 of Prima Secunda, St. Thomas Aquinas turns his attention to a extremely important topic in the Summa, and that is the natural law. And interestingly, in the 6 articles, he doesn't really give the definition because, remember, he already did that a few questions ago in talking about the 4 kinds of law. So just by way of refresher, the natural law is the portion of the eternal law that is known by the rational creature. Of course, that's us. And so it is what we know naturally, what's ingrained in us. When we know certain moral precepts just naturally, and we don't have to go running to the Bible or the catechism or asking advice about it. And he's going to give some examples in these 6 articles, so I won't go into a lot of examples because he will do that for us. And so this is very important. It also, natural law almost invariably would be believed by somebody who believes in God, because the natural law is in us for some reason. It's bringing us to some end. It's guiding us. It's very Aristotelian in that regard, in that we have purpose, we have final causes, we have a natural kind of inclination towards a certain flourishing or end. Okay, so that's very important to point out. So a lot of times the more atheistic or liberal secular philosophers are going to deny natural law for that exact reason, because it almost implies that there's something going on that involves a creator. And so just a little bit of information there. This one's also kind of long, so we'll go through it as quickly as we can, but I do want to cover it as thoroughly as possible. Article 1 says whether natural law is a habit. And as typical with St. Thomas Aquinas, he's going to say, yeah, in one way, yes, and in another way, no. This article is kind of confusing. So if you're confused by this one, don't give up. Keep listening or watching, because it does get a little bit more understandable. He says a thing may be called whether natural law is a habit. Okay, that's what it is. Whether natural law is a habit. He says a thing may be called a habit in 2 ways. First, properly and essentially, and thus the natural law is not a habit. All right. Since then, a habit is that by which we act. A law cannot be a habit properly and essentially. Okay, so really, when you think about a habit, it's something that is, habitual. Virtues are habits. Evil, there can be evil habits, there can be good habits. It's something that we just do, just kind of naturally. But he's saying that the law is really kind of imposed from without. So it's not really a habit in that regard, essentially. But he says, secondly, the term habit may be applied to that which we hold by a habit. Thus, faith may mean that by which we hold by faith. And accordingly, since the precepts of the natural law are sometimes considered by reason actually, while sometimes they are in the reason only habitually, in this way the natural law may be called a habit. I got to admit, as I've done many times in these articles, is that one's confusing to me. That one doesn't entirely make sense, but I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm going to keep plowing away and move into article number 2, which becomes a little bit more easy to understand. Article 2 says whether the natural law contains several precepts or only one. Is there just one natural law, or are there many? He says the precepts in the natural law are to the practical reason what the first principles of demonstrations are to the speculative reason. Okay, so practical reason has to do with operations, with actions. Speculative reason has to do with the contemplation of truth. Because, continuing now, both are self-evident principles. Okay, self-evident is something that we know before demonstration, before experience of the world. We just kind of know it innately, okay? So Plato believed that all of our knowledge was innate. We just had to go out and experience things, and then we remembered it because it's already there, right? So self-evident would be something that we don't have to go out and discover. It's kind of in us already. Now, a thing is said to be self-evident in 2 ways. First, in itself. Secondly, in relation to us. Any proposition is said to be self-evident in itself if its predicate is contained in the notion of the subject. All right, he's going to give some examples here. Although to one who knows not the definition of the subject, it happens that such a proposition is not self-evident. which is interesting because if it's self-evident, it should be known without a lot of explanation, right? And then he gives an example. For instance, this proposition, man is a rational being, is in its very nature self-evident, since whoever says man says a rational being, and yet to one who knows not what a man is, this proposition is not self-evident. So it requires a little bit of foreknowledge of what a man is in the first place, right? Hence it is, as Boethius says, certain axioms or propositions are universally self-evident to all, and such are those propositions whose terms are known to all. Okay, so now he's going to give some examples of things that everybody knows. All right, every whole is greater than its part. Things equal to one and the same are equal to one another. Okay, you don't have to, everybody just naturally knows that. This is innate. This is a priori, I guess you could say. But some propositions are self-evident only to the wise to understand the meaning of the terms of such propositions. Thus, to one who understands that an angel is not a body, it is self-evident that an angel is not circumscriptly in a place. But this is not evident to the unlearned, for they cannot grasp it. Okay, so there's a certain element of, like, you have to be somewhat learned to know some of these things, which are self-evident, which seems kind of contradictory, all right? Now I'm going to read these couple paragraphs here, and this is really interesting because he goes a little bit deeper into this whole idea of what, we can know naturally through natural law. He says, now a certain order is to be found in those things that are apprehended universally. For that which, before aught else, falls under apprehension is being, okay, existence, ontology, the notion of which is included in all things whatsoever a man apprehends. Wherefore, the first indemonstrable principle is that the same thing cannot be affirmed and denied at the same time. Okay, this is the law of non-contradiction, which is based on the notion of being and not being. Okay, something can't be and not be at the same time. It either is or it is not, right? And on this principle, all others are based. Now, as being is the first thing that falls under apprehension simply, so the good is first that falls under the apprehension of the practical reason, which is directed to action. Okay, so now he's gone from being, existence, to good. Okay, something that is desirable, right? Since every agent acts for an end under the aspect of good. Consequently, the first principle of practical reason is one founded on the notion of good, that is, that good is that which all things seek after. Okay, if all things seek after the good, according to Aristotle, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, now you got to define, well, what's good? Okay, if it's what we seek after, well, it's the things that we naturally seek after, right? Hence, this is the first precept of law, that good is to be done and pursued, and evil is to be avoided. All other precepts of the natural law are based upon this one, so that whatever the practical reason naturally apprehends as man's good or evil belongs to the precepts of the natural law as something to be done or avoided. All right, so interestingly, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote a book called Beyond Good and Evil because he thought that Christianity had mislabeled good and evil. He thought that what we consider as Christians to be good, humility and meekness, was not good at all. He thought it was power, it was drive, it was the Ubermensch, the Superman, right? Pursuing your natural desires to the point of conquest and subjugation. And so this whole idea of what is good and evil is not universally accepted, which seems to be a premise here, right? Since, however, good has the nature of an end and evil the nature of a contrary, hence it is that all those things to which a man has a natural inclination are naturally apprehended by reason as being good, and consequently as objects of pursuit, and their contraries as evil, and objects of avoidance. Wherefore, according to the order of natural inclinations, it is the order of the precepts of the natural law. So something we naturally desire, and he's going to give some examples here, would be part of the natural law. Because in man there is first of all an inclination to good in accordance with the nature which he has in common with all substances. Okay, what do we have in common with the dog and the cat and the squirrel and the butterfly, right? Inasmuch as every substance seeks the preservation of its own being according to its nature, and by reason of this inclination, whatever is a means of preserving human life and of warding off its obstacles belongs to the natural law. Okay, I think that's pretty, understandable. Secondly, there is in man an inclination to things that pertain to him more specifically according to that nature which he has in common with other animals. And in virtue of this inclination, those things are said to belong to the natural law, which nature has taught to all animals. So first of all, he talked about substances. Now he's talking about animals. Okay, every individual animal is going to be a substance, right? That's by definition an individual thing that's self-subsistent, that's existing on its own, is going to be a substance, right? Matter and form coming together. Such as sexual intercourse, education of offspring, and so forth. Thirdly, there is in man an inclination to good according to the nature of his reason, which nature is proper to him. Okay, proper means specific to us. Thus, man has a natural inclination to know the truth about God and to live in society, and in this respect, whatever pertains to this inclination belongs to the natural law. For instance, to shun ignorance, to avoid offending those among whom one has to live, and other such things regarding the above inclination. All right, so that's Article 2. That's kind of long. The other ones are a little bit shorter. Article 3, whether all acts of virtue are prescribed by the natural law. And he's going to say here, I'm just going to summarize this one for the sake of time, is that we naturally, by our very nature, we seek the good. Okay, virtue makes us good, so we are by nature virtuous, right? So in that regard, all acts of virtue are prescribed by the natural law. But then he says, well, in some cases, the virtue is not. He said, many things are done virtually to which nature does not incline at first, but which, through the inquiry of reason, have been found by men to be conducive to well-being. He doesn't give examples here, which is unusual because normally Thomas does, but I can think that a virtue, the theological virtues, for example, this is not natural, this is supernatural. Okay, it's not natural for us to, the hope of everlasting life and union with God. That's something extra. That's something that's added on. That's something that's given to us by grace through the theological virtues which are infused in us, which draw us to something beyond ourselves. Article 4, whether the natural law is the same in all men. And he says here, to the natural law belongs those things to which a man is inclined naturally. And among these, it is proper to man to be inclined to act according to reason. Now, the process of reason is from the common to the proper. The speculative reason, however, is differently situated in this matter from the practical reason. Remember, speculative is contemplation of truth. Practical has to do with actions, operations. For since the speculative reason is busied chiefly with the necessary things which cannot be otherwise than they are, its proper conclusions, like the universal principles, contain the truth without fail. The practical reason, on the other hand, is busied with contingent matters, about which human actions are concerned, and consequently, although there is necessity in the general principles, the more we descend to matters of detail, the more frequently we encounter defects. Accordingly, then, in speculative matters, truth is the same in all men. Okay, the contemplation of truth, the principles through which we contemplate the truth, that's the same in all men. But in operations, the lower you get and you descend in the order of details, you start to see a lot of contingencies that make it challenging to say that this is going to be a universal law. Accordingly, then, in speculative matters, truth is the same in all men, both as to principles and to conclusions. Although the truth is not known to all regarding the conclusions, but only as regards the principles, which are called common notions. But in matters of action, truth or practical rectitude is not the same for all as to matter of detail, but only as to the general principles, and where there is the same rectitude in matters of detail is not equally known to all. So hopefully that makes sense. And I know this is kind of challenging, but it's important nonetheless. Article 5 talks about, can the natural law be changed? And he says a change in the natural law may be understood in two ways. Okay, it's always in two ways. First, by way of addition. In this sense, nothing hinders the natural law from being changed, since many things for the benefit of human life have been added over and above the natural law, both by the divine law and by the human law. So things can be added on, which is interesting. Secondly, a change in the law may be understood by way of subtraction, so that what previously was according to the natural law ceases to be so. In this sense, the natural law is altogether unchangeable in its first principles, but in its secondary principles are certain detailed proximate conclusions drawn from the first principles. The natural law is not changed so that what is prescribed are not right in most cases, but it may be changed in some particular cases of rare occurrences through some special causes hindering the observations of such precepts as is stated above. Okay, so basically it can be added onto, but it can't be subtracted. Only under very, very rare circumstances can it be subtracted. All right, Article 6, the final article, whether the law of nature can be abolished from the heart of man. There belongs to the natural law, first, certain most general precepts that are known to all, and secondly, certain secondary and more detailed precepts, which are, as it were, conclusions following closely from first principles. As to these general principles, the natural law in the abstract can nowise be blotted out from men's hearts, but it is blotted out in the case of a particular action, insofar as reason is hindered from applying the general principle to a particular point of practice on account of concupiscence or some other passion. But as to the other, that is, the secondary precepts, the natural law can be blotted out from the human heart either by evil persuasions, just as in speculative matters errors occur in respect of necessary conclusions, or by vicious customs and corrupt habits, as among some men, theft, and even unnatural vices, as the apostle states, were not esteemed sinful. So I think the bottom line in all of this is that there seems to be not a clear line of saying, this is natural law, this is not natural law. You've got the speculative, you've got the practical, you've got the, so many contingencies here. But basically, there is a law that is placed in most men's hearts and minds that is inviolable. But as you get lower and lower, in a lot of particular circumstances and exceptions are allowed, it gets hazy, it gets fuzzy. Okay, that's what I take from this, and I know that may be difficult in not black and white, but I think that's what St. Thomas Aquinas is getting at. So anyways, thanks for watching. God bless you. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us.